are a number of things that you can figure out in your home when you have the ceiling height. Hi everyone, it's Carol from Discover Interior Design, and I'm so glad you're here. Well, in this video, we are going to talk about another part of our series on measuring a room, and this time we're focusing on the ceiling height and what we can do with that information. So when we have this information about how tall our ceilings are, we can estimate things like maybe we want to figure out how much paint we need for a room. Or we can also design and plan something, maybe even remodeling a kitchen. So there's a lot of different things that we can accomplish and a lot of different things that we can figure out when we have those measurements. And so when you want to measure how tall your ceiling is, there are a couple things to keep in mind. So the first thing is that I would recommend having someone help you do this, just because it is your ceiling and it's tall, and so you may find it helpful to have either someone taking notes with you or helping you do those measurements. And one of the easiest ways to measure a ceiling, just because it is higher, would be to use your phone if you have that capability, or to use a laser measuring tape. But if you are going to use a standard measuring tape, one thing that you can do to kind of keep it stable, because that measuring tape is going to go up pretty far, is to measure from an inside corner. That just means where the two walls meet, and it's an inside corner, because in that way it's easy to place that tape measure up there and it will be a little bit more stable. And of course, you're measuring all of this in feet. And when you are measuring how tall your ceiling is, just measure what you need, because maybe you have an angled ceiling, but really all you need to figure out is how much paint you need for your walls. You're not worried about painting the ceiling. Well, you don't have to measure the highest point in your ceiling. All you need to measure is just on your walls and that highest point where the ceiling meets the walls. And with any measurements that we take in our home, measure twice and then cut once. So that means just measuring at least twice, just to double check that your measurements are accurate. And one of the most basic things that we can estimate, knowing the ceiling height as well as the width and length of a room, is to figure out how much paint we need. So for a really basic calculation, what you need to do is just take the perimeter of your room, the total perimeter of your room, and multiply that times the height of the room. And that will give you the square footage. And of course, you're measuring all of this in feet. If you just want to paint one wall, maybe you want to paint an accent wall, well then you would just need to measure that one wall, the width, the length of that wall, and just the ceiling height. And then multiply those two together, and that gives you the square footage. And in general, when you buy a gallon of paint, say at the paint store, that usually covers 400 to 500 square feet. So that's just something to keep in mind. But what I would do is take notes of all of your measurements. Take notes of each of your walls and each of the heights and each of the widths, and have all of those measurements with you and double check all those measurements. Because when you do go to the paint store, it'll be helpful for them to be able to see your measurements, and then they will be able to calculate the actual amount of paint that you'll need, because they're the professionals. So I would leave it up to them to calculate that. But you for sure can estimate that with your calculations, but just to take really good measurements so they can make a really accurate estimate for you at the store. And in the metric system, you'll be measuring your room in meters, and then paint will be available in pints. And when you know the ceiling height and the width or length of a wall, you can also estimate wallpaper. And one thing with wallpaper is that I always recommend starting with a wallpaper that you want to purchase, because each wallpaper will be a little bit different. Each wallpaper will vary on the repeat that it has, or even the length of a roll. So you'll want to know that ahead of time and then having that information of the ceiling height and the width or length of a wall, then you'll be able to calculate how many rolls that you'll need. And with wallpaper measurements, you're going to measure in feet. And so you'll measure the width or length of the wall and then the height of the wall, and then multiply those two numbers together to get the square footage. In general, wallpaper comes in rolls, and so in a retail setting, either online or in a store, we'll find wallpaper rolls usually around 2 feet wide. But with an average wallpaper roll, usually that covers around 30 square feet. But all of this will depend on the wallpaper you choose, as well as the length and maybe even the width of that roll. So with those simple measurements of just knowing the height and also the width or length of a wall, you'll be able to go online or in person and figure out how many rolls that you need. And when you have those measurements and also the square footage, then you'll be able to look at the wallpaper that you'd like to buy. And many times, all of these retailers, whether they have an in-person store or just everything online, have calculators to help you figure out how many rolls you will need. And some of those print-on-demand websites where you can order wallpaper and fabric, they will have wallpaper rolls in varying lengths. So it's really important just to have those basic measurements and to input that information into their calculator, and then they can calculate for you how many rolls you'll need to buy. And with wallpaper, you may want to think about subtracting bigger areas that are on your wall. So what I mean by that is maybe you have a big opening on one of your walls, or maybe even built-in shelving or cabinetry. You'd want to subtract those areas from your total amount, just so you're not buying too much wallpaper. And I would just recommend doing that, subtracting those areas for those features that are taking up a lot of wall space. And the other thing that can be accomplished with knowing how tall your ceilings are, and of course the width and length of a room or a wall, is to really plan out a design of something. And so when you want to design something on a wall, say a kitchen designer wants to design or remodel your kitchen, they will create what's called an elevation, which is, in a simple way, just a floor plan on a wall. So, a floor plan is a horizontal layout of a room, but an elevation is almost like a wall plan of a room. It's a way for us to plan things out on that vertical surface of a wall. With an elevation, just like in a floor plan, that's going to be in scale. So meaning that all of the different measurements and everything that you are planning out on that elevation will be in the same scale, so that all of those measurements will make sense together. So with the ceiling height as well as the width or length of a wall, then it's easy to create an elevation, whether that's with an online design tool or even just on a piece of graph paper or grid paper. And then you would just draw everything out to scale. So a kitchen designer would want to draw out each of those walls in a kitchen just to show the accurate measurements and the accurate placement of everything, and just to have everything planned out so they'll know what size of cabinets will fit in that space and all of the details that go into planning a really functional and beautiful kitchen. And kitchen designers will also use that information to create more involved drawings, like three-dimensional drawings, so that the client can get an idea of how that kitchen is going to look. And a simple way to kind of just practice drawing or creating an elevation would be maybe if you just want to play with the placement of artwork on your wall, or you want to put some sconces on your wall, and maybe you want to kind of figure out the placement of those sconces. Well, you could just draw a very simple elevation just to kind of play with the placement of those different things. And all you would do is just take a piece of graph paper or grid paper and space plan everything out, just as you would on a floor plan. Just space plan everything out on an elevation. And then that way you can visualize the placement of artwork or where you want to place a sconce. So when you have the ceiling height and the width and length of a wall, using that information to create an elevation is a great way to visualize how things are going to look and to plan things out, just as you would if you wanted to plan out a floor plan where you would decide where to place all your furniture. It's the same thing on an elevation where you're going to place everything on the wall. So use it as a fun tool to help you do that. And then let me know if you have any questions about this topic, and if you have any other ideas for us or suggestions for us on taking measurements in our home. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.